Diamonds are everywhere. There are megatons of diamonds. It rains diamonds on other planets. You know what's super rare that exists nowhere else in the galaxy? Wood, a tree.
My name is Aiden Sharon. I am the Director of unpacks initiatives at earthday.org, and today I'm speaking with Bill Weir, CNN Chief Climate Correspondent and host of The Wonderlist. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Aiden. Good to talk to you.
Awesome. So you started to write letters to your baby son, River, on Earth Day, and that was the starting point in a way for this book. So glad we're a part of it, by the way. We really appreciate the little shout out. But
Thank you.
How did that come about, and what inspired the letters to begin with, and why on Earth Day?
Well, it actually started with my daughter. I've a sort of a modern family where my kids are 16 years apart. My little girl, when I realized that she was going to turn my age in the year 2050, I had just come to CNN. It was in the wake of Anthony Bourdain. They wanted more shows like his, and I pitched a show that said, look, why don't I go to the wonders of the world and wonder what will be left of them when my little girl is my age? And they said yes to the greatest job ever. And so I ended up shooting in 27 different countries, 3 seasons of that. Came back with so many lessons about, we're going to plant a garden after I go to a blue zone in Greece, or, we're all getting bicycles when I'd come back from the Netherlands, and sort of gathering ideas from the happiest, healthiest societies that really inspired me. But while that was happening, my marriage to my daughter fell apart, and I ended up with my new partner becoming a new old dad at the height of the pandemic in 2020. And by this point, I had been basically made the chief climate correspondent at CNN. And so I was getting sent into disaster after disaster, just focusing on the most depressing science that comes out every day about things that are happening in real time and where we're headed. And so I looked down at my little wiggling baby boy and realized this kid is going to live to see the 22nd century.
Right.
So many changes will happen. Using my daughter as sort of a measuring stick about what's going to happen in her lifetime. Now I have a whole reset on that idea, and I wanted to combine both the inspiration that I'd found around the world and also a warning, like we have to build different kinds of homes now. Unfortunately, we have to think about our food, our air, our water in ways that I haven't even bothered to think about. And so that started as an Earth Day letter, sort of welcome to the world. Sorry. Sorry we broke the sea and the sky and shortened the wings of the nightingale. But not only having just sort of a clear-eyed evaluation of where things are as he was coming into the world, but all these amazing ideas that I get to talk about in my journeys and my reporting, solutions, big ideas, and simple ancient wisdom, and applied together. I'm just trying to, just like any old dad, trying to tell my kid, don't learn from my mistakes, son, And so that was the inspiration for the book, which I call Life as We Know It Can Be. It's the idea that life as we know it may be over in terms of changing ecosystems around us, but life as we know it can be is available right now. And so many amazing, inspiring ideas that I picked up around the world that, taken together, can build more resilient societies regardless of what comes.
It's really an incredible read. You seem to do something really clever with it. You unpack climate change by revealing the places you have witnessed firsthand paying the price for climate change. But then you pivot to these survival stories around it. Can you talk us through a couple of those examples where you saw those firsthand?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them. I saw them both in sort of the animal kingdom and the human world as well. I was down at my first trip to Antarctica on a story about whales and the comeback of the humpback whale. And I followed these scientists down there. It was just miraculous. We were taking pregnancy tests with crossbows of these whales to try to get a sense.
Can you walk me through that at all?
Well, it's very hard to get a whale to pee on a stick, first of all. But they want to measure maternity rates in relation to the disappearing sea ice. That ice is where the krill is born, and that's their food supply. And so you can see a correlation. But while we were there, I went ashore for the first time on my 7th continent and was greeted by thousands of these Gentoo penguins. and it was delightful. But then I realized that sadly they were sort of hatching eggs and building nests that would be worthless because of climate change.
Right.
Their nesting season had been delayed by a month, and these babies wouldn't have the time to get fat enough and enough for the feathers to survive the winter and swimming in the ocean. And I was super bummed about that. But when I talked to some scientists, I learned that the gentoo penguin, this one species, is actually thriving. Their numbers are up by 30,000% because they're the one species that is adapting to the changes. While rockhopper and Adelie penguins are trying to stay in these ancient nesting spots, the gentoos are moving with the changes and are sort of showing us you gotta roll with these changes. But then I cover, I have the sort of the privilege of covering big stories like the Maui wildfires or hurricanes in Florida, Hurricane Ian, Maria in Puerto Rico, where I can go back to these places. The fires of Paradise, California, I just went back 5 years later after the deadliest fire in California history and met the survivors, talked to the people who had been through it, what inspired them to rebuild, what was most, invigorating for them in these horrible days. And that, to me, I just met some personal heroes in these spaces, and really they're role models. What I'm trying to impart to my little boy about thinking in a life of service, especially at a time when the stuff I took for granted, food, water, temperature, safety, safe homes that are safe against the storm, all that's changing. And my dad sort of raised me with the every time I'd complain, his comeback was, "Good thing you're tough," which may not be the most sensitive, child psychology, but this generation now, we have to impart a little bit of that. I'm sorry, you got to be tough because it's going to get harder and harder. But now is the time to connect, to knit communities stronger together. So when things do get rough, that we can rely on each other.
So is that the message for you, that while climate change isn't good, like we all know that it's not great, but it's a reality, but it is survivable? Like you've experienced from living underground, creating cooling stations into repurposed buildings. The list goes on, and how we and other species are to survive this rapid change.
Yeah, I think that it's a couple of things, right? There was a saying from, I believe it was a policy advisor in the Obama White House, that climate change demands three things of us. It's mitigation, adaptation, and pain. And that's sort of three slices of pie. And how much pain is there depends on how much time you think about mitigating the problem, stopping the planet cooking pollution from getting thicker, and also adaptation, bracing for what's coming, which is really difficult, right? I did a story last week on the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border of this town, Salisbury Beach, where they've watched the tide get higher and higher over the generations. And together the community goes in and they buy a whole bunch of sand. They bought $600,000 worth of sand to fortify their beach against storms. It's supposed to last typically 3 to 4 years. It was gone in a single storm in one day. And watching folks sort of cycle through the 5 stages of grief around that, and some very much stuck in denial, others bargaining, others just depressed. Those kinds of lessons, I think we got to talk about this problem a lot more. It's such a heavy idea that the fuels that built the modern world and expanded human lifespans are coming back to bite us in the butt. And the economies that depend on the old ways of doing things have to change in real time in a just way. It's just the biggest problem humanity will ever solve. And if you think about it too much, you can either like crawl into a bong or a bottle and check out, or you can get invigorated to say, all right, now I know the house is on fire. How big of a hose do we need? What are we going to save? You go get the pets. I'll get the mementos. Like, let's just activate and turn that anxiety into action and realize that we can stave off the worst effects. Humanity has amazing agency to do that. And we can adapt like the Gentoo penguin.
Do you ever worry that this is an overly optimistic approach to thinking about moving forward in the future?
Totally. I do. And there are days, honestly, when I'm the most pessimistic person there is, because I was actually supposed to deliver this book a couple of years ago,
Uh-huh.
and it just didn't come together for me for a lot of reasons. But I'm glad it didn't, because some things happened in terms of policy, at least in the United States. The Inflation Reduction Act put sort of renewable energy on sale in a way that is just supercharged uh, new sustainable technology.
Right.
Billions are pouring of private investment is chasing that. We're sort of like, there was a point when we weren't going back to the horse for transportation. We've reached that point now, and so that's exciting. There's this whole industrial revolution that's happening, but at the same time, the biggest drivers of this problem, the giant fossil fuel interests, the petrostates, show no signs of dialing it back. And all the solar and wind in the world, which is now the cheapest fuel in human history, won't matter if we just keep burning the old stuff in order to feed our insatiable demand for new energy.
So to go back to that political angle a little bit, one of the things I noticed is your reference to Republican Howard Baker back in the 70s arguing for the Clean Water Act. It seems surprising now to learn that it was men like Baker from the right pushing for these protections. Did that surprise you in writing this book and kind of going over it? It seems crazy now, but
Yeah, no, this is one of those things that the more I sort of covered the environmental and energy and climate beat, looking back at our history, it is staggering to think about, like, the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts were passed with such bipartisan support.
right.
And I think a lot of it had to do with just how obvious the problem was. When I was a little boy, you could taste the air in Los Angeles. You couldn't see the Hollywood sign from downtown. Fires in rivers in Ohio were starting on fire. The
Right.
national bird, the bald eagle, was going extinct because of pesticides were making their eggs brittle. It was just like you could see the destruction all around you. And the litter, anti Keep America Beautiful campaign was just getting going, where people sort of made conscious of it. And now in hindsight, to think, could those have passed? Richard Nixon tried to veto the Clean Water Act, I think, and was overrun by Senate, which again is just inconceivable with our current politics right now. But what's also interesting is that today, the state leading the union in clean energy, in both wind power and the new installations of solar, is Texas. Way more than California. They've paced Florida on solar. And despite political and ideological resistance, it now just makes such economic sense that if you're building a power plant or you're building a energy intense factory that up until now didn't have the technology to tap into wind and solar because you needed storage and you needed to solve the intermittency, that's being solved. And so it's rearranging industries. I think the wind and sun belts will be magnets the way what the former Rust Belt was when it comes to these sorts of things. And so the politics around this whole topic, all of my life, it's been just chopped up in ways that have done us all a big disservice. There's nothing political about the laws of physics. And, the global warming, that the greenhouse effect, you can duplicate all of the science you need to know to understand that in a 7th grade laboratory. But we're made of stories. And the prevalent story has been we need to burn these fuels to survive and keep economies humming. It's been proven now you don't have to anymore. And it's just a matter of how fast that story changes.
You talked in your book about being in the field, and being a field reporter means you're colliding with reality under mostly terrible circumstances, like Hurricane Katrina. I was reading your book yesterday about you needing to buy a speedboat.
Yeah.
How much did this type of experience change your prospects as a journalist, and how did it lead you to becoming the chief climate correspondent today?
Well, Katrina was my first disaster. I was just a cub reporter at ABC News, and I had come up as a local anchor and sports guy who was just the funny highlights dude at the end of the local newscast in LA and Chicago, and so I was really trying to cut my teeth as a serious network reporter, and I went down there not knowing what to expect, and we were the one network where we didn't have a satellite truck in the city as the levees breached. Everyone was around the perimeter. And so it was like a race to get in and start reporting. And the roads were all closed and the air was closed. I tried to charter a helicopter. And at one point I hopped a fence of this boat dealership in Gonzales, Louisiana, and banged on the door hoping to, rent a boat. And the guy answered the door with a pistol because he thought I was going to loot him. And I said, "Can you take us down the Mississippi River into the French Quarter?" He goes, "No, I can't put a boat on the Mississippi, but I'll take you across Lake Pontchartrain, like through the bayou." And he backs out this gleaming, brand new, you know, 350 horsepower cigarette boat and said, "All right, I can get you there in an hour, and it'll only be $110,000. So I'm calling back to New York. "How badly do you want me? Because I could be there." But that event and what unfolded there, I didn't appreciate how seismic it was until I've been doing this, and it covered a dozen more hurricanes over the years. But it messes with our human perceptions of time and water. When you watch a hurricane coming for days and you see where it's going to hit, and if you're in a place like New Orleans where you're in, a long drive from the nearest beach, you don't think about it emptying Lake Pontchartrain into your living room, and
Right.
you don't think about it drowning folks in their kitchen or driving them into the attic where they die of heat exposure because they don't have an axe to chop their way out. I go ashore on this speedboat 2 days after landfall, and people were like, the storm just happened. This woman's calling out to me, this elderly woman, for medicine and information, and they were completely cut off. They had no idea what was happening. And what I learned is that sudden disaster oftentimes brings people together all at once. Like, you go through the 5 stages of grief at the same time,
Yeah.
and you get to a place where we will rebuild hashtag, and it's a psychological thing that you go through. Drawn out long disasters tend to pull communities apart. If there's a drought or a famine, and you start to look at your neighbors and like, where did they get that water? And the resentments simmer, and those are tests of communities. But those rules don't have to apply for people who are connected and have some foresight and are plugged into their ecosystems wherever they live. Part of the message is hope that we still have agency and so much can be saved. Some of it is get ready, because there's a lot of pain that's already baked in and it's coming, but it makes it all the more incumbent on each other to get ready for that and to build resilience every chance we can.
Yeah, I grew up on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, so we got hit by hurricanes every year or so, and then moved down to Wilmington, North Carolina, and we got wiped out by hurricanes every year or so. So it's the one time you saw the whole community really come together and just put everything aside. It was really, really inspiring, but at the same time terrifying.
For sure. And the other parts of human nature then filter in, right, where the drywall starts to rot, or the kids can't go back to school, and then there's a big wait for contractors, and there's and it's once the sun comes out after one of these disasters, I realize these folks are so relieved they survived, but it's just the beginning of the long journey that comes from moving from a survivor to a thriver again.
Right. So while writing the book, has it changed you? Did you give up eating beef or give up anything like that after talking to people?
Yeah, I mean, my diet has definitely changed. I went and covered the Blue Zone in Greece, in Ikaria, with Dan Buettner years ago, and came back inspired by that. My partner, River's mom, is a vegetarian, which makes me, as Samuel Jackson said in Pulp Fiction, a vegetarian by extension. But I found some reporting in the book about sometimes a veggie burger can be worse for the environment than a properly raised herd of cattle. And if they graze like the buffalo, then can recharge soils. There's new science around that. But of course, there's horrible ways to raise meat and dairy, and there's good ways to raise everything. And and some stuff just by, like, when I came back, like I said earlier, I came back from the Netherlands and doing stories in Scandinavia and the biking culture and how attractive that was, growing up in a car culture. That we got city bikes here in New York City, where the rental bikes, when they were a novelty. I was one of the first ones to get those. I looked on my app the other day. I've got almost 4,000 miles on city bikes, and that's not because I'm trying to be some Captain Planet. I hate cars. I love, I used to have a 62 Corvette. But for me, it's just more fun moving through the city on a bike and not sitting in traffic. And I feel like I'm getting some exercise and whatever, And so it's just the way we talk about these things doesn't have to be, you got to sell your car because the polar bears are drowning. you know, yeah, we should care about the polar bears. I love polar bears, but maybe it doesn't matter whether you sell your car. Maybe it matters more if you go to, meetings of your local water board or your
Right.
utility commission and understand the big decisions that are being made on your neighborhood's behalf, and get involved that way, or whatever you're into. That's the great thing about this. When people say, what can we do? Well, what are you into? Because the story touches every aspect of life.
So for this next question, I'd like you to be a little bit honest.
Okay.
How important are events like Earth Day or World Wildlife Day or National Mangrove Day to you and your family?
They are sort of by extension of my job, and these letters to River now increasingly important.
I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us today. Is there any final messages you'd like to put out for Earth Day, or just Earth Day is every day?
Earth Day is every day. Earth care is self-care. Um, Go for a hike. Go for a hike with somebody you may not know very well, or maybe somebody you might disagree with, and connect over a sunset or a great fishing hole. And yeah, let's not forget the other 364 days.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Anytime. Great talking to you.